to Fantastical Fictions, which is the reading series for science fiction and fantasy, very loosely defined genre, very inclusive of all types of fantasy and science fiction. Excuse me. So tonight we get to hear from the wonderful Stina Leicht, who has been turning out these fabulous novels, one after the other. One of the first ones is Of Blood and Honey. I'm always forgetting the articles, which in both of these are part of a duology. Duology. So it's just the two of them.
Right now, so far.
So that's why I always look. Maybe there'll be more. The really fascinating thing about this is they're about the Fae, but it's set in very real Ireland of the 1970s and the Troubles. So it's a really interesting intersection of historical fiction and fantasy. So it's a little different than just straight up fantasy. And then her most recent book, which has been doing wonderfully, is called Cold Iron, and Flintlock Fantasy, which is something I had not heard of before this, but is totally cool. So it's fantasy that's moved forward enough in time to involve a little some guns.
So it's like War and Peace with magic.
How cool is that? So I like it. All right. So it works now. It's yours now.
It's mine.
Yes. So Stina has been a Campbell Award nominee and is a Crawford Award finalist. And has been writing books. And let's hear some of it. Madly writing.
Okay, so I have 4 options for you tonight. So for reading, so I thought I'd take a vote. I can read from the Irish stuff from the first book, or I can read from the new series, the first book in the new series, or I can read from the work in progress, which is book 2, called Blackthorn, which I'm supposed to turn in soon. So hopefully it will come out next year. 2017. So, preferences?
Yeah, Blackthorn.
Two Blackthorn votes. Okay, so, I don't know, I was thinking the Irish stuff would actually fit this place better because it's Irish crime.
Why don't you do a little Blackthorn, and then can you give us just a little bit of that?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd give us a little of the Irish stuff, and then if you want to give us some of the new stuff.
You know what, I'm just going to start with the Irish stuff.
Yeah,
and then I'll move to Blackthorn. How's that sound?
That sounds
Okay.
collective decision-making works.
I like to give people options because, All right, and I also need to give a warning. Okay, so I did 5 years of research for this, and part of that was I listened to audiobooks written by Irish crime writers, Northern Irish crime writers. One of my favorites is Adrian McKinty. And I listened to these books on audiobook form, and the narrator they got to read books does a Northern Irish accent. So I spent 2 years listening to Adrian McKinty's books like over and over in my head so I could get the speech patterns in the vicinity of correct. And it helped tremendously. So if I happen to slip into an Irish accent by accident and it's horrible or whatever, please don't be offended. So anyway, Of Blood and Honey is set in the 1970s in the Troubles. The main character is named Liam Kelly. He is he thinks his father got his mother pregnant and then vanished. Thought his father was a Protestant in the military, and in reality his father is actually Bran of the Fianna, who, I don't know if you know anything at all about Irish mythology at all. It's, the Fianna were like they were more like King Arthur and the knights. They're not the little tiny happy creatures that live in flowers, butterfly wings. They're not that at all. They're more like King Arthur, that kind of thing. So his father is actually a shapeshifter, a puka, which if you've ever seen the movie Hardy, you'll know what a puka is. If you haven't, I suggest it because it's really good. So he's half puka, my main character. He's half puka, doesn't know it, gets dragged into the troubles, becomes a wheelman for an IRA bank robbing unit, and then everything goes horribly awry. That was the elevator pitch. But that should get you started. Okay, so chapter 1. Cool. Chapter 1, Londonderry/Derry, County Londonderry, Northern Ireland. 13th of November, 1971. Got one of the abos, sir. Liam lay on the cracked pavement with a British soldier's boot planted in the center of his back, struggling against the pain to breathe. Thoughts galloped through his head in one long stream. Oh God, please don't shoot. Wasn't throwing stones. I don't want to die. I'll never sleep with Mary Kate if I do shit. Jesus, I'm sorry. I swear I'll never touch her again. I know it's a mortal sin. No venial, no mortal. Oh, for fuck's sake, what's the difference? The BA soldier leaned closer. Liam could feel his breath on his neck and itched with the need to escape, the cold gun barrel pressed to the back of his skull. As if to illustrate the point, the thud-thud of riot guns went off somewhere. Peppery CS gas drifted by in a wispy clump. Among the crowd, those caught without vinegar-soaked handkerchiefs gagged and coughed. Someone shouted in the chaos. Liam guessed it was one of the frontliners, the boys who regularly rioted on Aggro Corner, because the words weren't complimentary of BAs, nor apparently the farm animals that might accompany them on cool winter nights. Don't you fucking move. Bullet may be rubber, but at this range it will fuck with your day. You got me? Yes, sir, Liam said, desperately trying to remember the act of contrition. But the pressure on the back of his head won out over Sister Margaret's ruler as far as his memory was concerned. He began to shiver, whether from cold or fear, he wasn't certain. He'd seen what happened to Annette McGavigan last September. She'd been standing with a group of girls, watching the frontliners at their work, hoping to collect a rubber bullet souvenir. Everyone did. In the course of the riot, a BA fired into the crowd. Liam had happened to glance her direction when the top of her head had come off. It had given him nightmares for weeks. So that's the first one. Yeah, I did a very extensive research on this, and I had a contact in Belfast, in West Belfast, whose cousins, actually, one of his cousins did time in Longcash prison, and the main character does end up there. Oops. So his name is Brian Mickey. He was really cool to help me out and check everything, so he vetted everything. But I had a lot of fun with it. And again, it's very vivid Irish crime, very violent. And then I added magical elements to it. So it was a lot of fun. But it's also nothing like, I mean, the cover looks kind of, soft. But
There's some blood on the cover, isn't there?
yeah, I actually asked them to put the blood on the cover. So I was just imagining people like picking up going, oh, look, it's a nice, sweet little puppy. It's a little happy story. And then going, ah! So, yeah. All right, so I will move on to the other series, which is completely and totally different. It's epic fantasy, and it's Flintlock Fantasy. The first book centers around Suvi and Nels, who are twins. I'll just say this, the kingdom falls apart and subsequently things go really, really bad because things go really, really bad in my novels. So that's that book. And then in the second book, their adventures continue. And I don't introduce this book very well. So the second book is called Blackthorn. I can't think of anything to say to start this off, so I'm just going to go into it.
Well, at least tell them who Dylan is.
Okay, Dylan is a friend of Subi's and Nels's. Dylan is part of the Waterborne, which I kind of, sort of, really, really loosely based on. They aren't pirates. They're actually merchants. So they see themselves as merchants, and so they're called the Waterborne Nations. It's a loose confederacy, and they trade with other peoples. So they don't tend to go to war. They make money off of it. That's what they do. They don't tend to. They're very secretive about their homeland. They don't let anybody know where that is. According to anybody else on the continent, they're just like, those people don't even have a homeland. They just rent ports. So everything, they live on the ships. All their families live on the ships with them. So yeah, that's Dylan. So we start off with Dylan. Dylan. Coral Star, frigate of clan caste, Waterborne Nations. 150 miles southeast off the coast of Acrasia. Agrarian Ocean, 20th of August, 1783. Thunder punched the air. Flashes of lightning stitched crooked seams into the billowing black clouds. Dylan Cass staggered out onto the quarterdeck just as an 18-foot wall of water crashed into the side of the Coral Star, scouring the boards. Unsecured fishing traps washed over the side, and the deck violently tilted 45 degrees. Unfortunately, he hadn't yet fixed himself to the lifeline, so he scrabbled for a handhold before he went the way of the vanished traps. Cold seawater finished the drenching. The rain had begun. Lost in the chaos of water and wind, his grip slipped. He slammed into the platform ladder. Pain exploded into his shoulder, arm, and back. He opened his mouth to scream and swallowed seawater. The ocean sucked, hungry for him. He fought for purchase on the ladder rail, finally anchoring himself with both hands. He hugged it with all his might. At last the wave moved on. The ship righted itself, and he was dropped on boards with stinging eyes and nasal passages, coughing and spitting. He fought to acquire his balance on chilled bare feet. Shoulder-length spirit knots hung in clumps in his face. The clatter of the prayer tokens sewed into his braids was lost in the screaming wind. With his free hand, he searched his belt for the heavy metal clasp used to hook onto the lifeline. It wasn't this bad when I went to my bunk, Dylan thought. What happened? The weather had been unseasonably calm over the summer months. That had meant a prosperous fishing and trade season for Clan Cask. However, August marked the start of storm season. Now was the time when McGreer, for whom the Eastern Ocean was named, demanded her due. We shouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be here for the Acrasians drowned them, he thought. He felt a little guilty for that sentiment, given the news. The waterborne nations avoided open hostility as a matter of policy. For Clan Cass, that friendly facade had lasted until the Emperor of Acrasia had discovered Clan Cass's support of the deposed Eladorian queen. Thus, Coral Star had found herself the target of a vengeful Agrarian fleet. Captain Brian McGee had gambled on turning into a squall to boost their tail, and Dylan Cask, serving as his weathermaster for this venture, had exhausted himself getting them safely away. But this was no squall, it was a typhoon. I won't let this thing sink, Dylan thought. Not as long as I have any power left. Coral Star was Cask, and Clan Cask was his family. I can't let Dar die. I won't. A loud splittering crack ripped the air. Broken oak pounded the boards beneath his feet with a force that he could feel in his teeth. Someone screamed. Another wave pounded the boards, this time from a less dangerous angle. The crew waded in water up to the knee until it passed. Captain McGee shouted, "Drop the lightning rod chains and reef the mainsail. Clear the deck and get that hatch secure. Now, drown you now!" First the message, Dylan thought. Nothing I do will make a difference if I don't get the message to Dar or Captain McGee. The sailors rushed in to comply with Captain McGee's orders. Dylan squinted against the wind and rain, searching among them for the one face he'd risked the storm in his weakened state to find. One of Dar's message birds had announced its arrival with a crash against the cabin's window glass. Dar, whose main responsibility was the ship's messenger, hadn't been present to receive the bird, since there were no idlers during bad weather, with the exception of the weathermaster. Dylan had saved the poor creature before the storm had claimed it. However, the bird had returned the favor by depositing a great deal of water into the cabin in the process. I should probably stop there, yeah?
No, you should keep going. Get some water.
I can go?
This is the book we can buy.
Okay. Let's see. Rain lashed Dylan's face, blinding him yet again. He felt someone grab his arm and then a tug at his waist as a tether was anchored to his belt. Dylan flipped long, wet braids out of his eyes. That was when he spied Dar's lighter brown face. His hair, with its short tufts, made him easy to recognize, even under these conditions. Dar was the only practicing loud dancer on board above the age of 12 with such short spirit knots. I'll never grow him past his ears. Willie, Dylan thought, with a warm inward smile. My Dar will be forever doing penance. Dar glared, his spiked hair underlining his displeasure. What in all the gods' names are you doing up here? And without a lifeline? You know better than to... Dylan shouted against the wind. You have a visitor! Dar paused. Is? White Wing. She's half drowned, but she made it all right. Must reward her, Dar said. Did the message scroll make it? It did. I assume it's urgent? Captain Argyle says the Emperor's crown foundered. We can finally get out of this swiving storm. Thank the gods and goddesses and all the seas. Get any rest? Some. Enough. Dylan knew that what Dar was asking. This was no time for truth. Enough. I know you. That means no. Get yourself safe below, Dar said, resolve lending a hardness to his expression. Coral Star can weather this. It isn't as bad as it seems. In truth, they had weathered worse, but only because McGee had been lucky. Dylan didn't think Greer was with them this day. He swallowed Dar's lie and then gave him a kiss. They both knew the odds. Dylan could feel it in the intensity of his lover's lips. He tried not to make it too obvious a goodbye. Be careful. You too, Dar said. I love you. And I love you too. Now go. Once Dar had gone, Dylan prepared himself to begin his ritual. His feet were already bare, and he was tethered. He found an out-of-the-way place next to the ladder and put his back against a wall. He didn't want to interfere with the work of the crew. With that done, he stretched his arms wide, took in a deep breath, and began. The first law of magic is thus. Energy does not vanish, it transforms. All are born of water. All shall return to water. Using the sea washing again across the ship's boards, he extended his consciousness across Coral Star's wooden surface and around her spotless hull. This close, he could sense the woodmaster at her work as she battled the sea to keep the ship sound. Her workings involved both hardness and flexibility. Beneath her hands, Coral Star was a living entity, bound and knit together without nails. They exchanged a quick, wordless blessing, and then he left her to her duty. Feeling his way, he invoked the tension between seawater and hull to anchor his body to the deck through his feet and back. With that done, he let his awareness rise above the ship. He passed through dense clouds as he floated and sensed various air densities. It got colder the higher he got. Not that he could have said how or why he felt this. His body remained on the ship. He shouldn't have felt anything at all, yet he did. It wasn't consistent, these senses. For example, wind had no effect on him, which was a good thing considering. He moved upward through the banks of swiftly moving fog until he reached a place where the storm was divided into two parts. The broadest part stretching out for miles above him in a dense spiral. He felt his heart drop into his stomach. From his new perspective, he understood the typhoon was too big, far too big for him to control. The best he could do was shift the worst of the storm's forces away from Coral Star. Those energies would transfer to another part of the typhoon, forming larger, more dangerous waves and winds. Using a distant part of himself, he lowered his arms, widened his stance, and pushed his palms out in front of himself with focused grace. Then he tucked in his elbows, bumping them against the ship. The second law of magic is thus: the tide which goes out shall return, bringing with it all energy collected in his wake. That is why it was important to keep one's intent pure. One could choose to ignore the second law, but too much carelessness exacted a high price, one that would be unpredictable. Ultimately, he hoped any nearby ships would have the wherewithal to save themselves. Such thoughts didn't guarantee negate negative effects. He was only a mortal being, after all. And some forces were far more powerful than the will of one water-born weathermaster. But it was best to make allowances in one's working nonetheless. May the Mother of all waters bless the souls circled in her blessed embrace this night. For all are worthy, he prayed. I, Dylan Cask, beseech the great Lady Agreer for her favor. I make this request for Coral Star and her crew. I weave the winds and dance the seas in the intent of the best outcome for those touched by my will. With that, he shoved his arms forward and used all the magical energy he had to wedge the heaviest winds away from the ship. He'd once tried to explain what it was like to weatherwork to his friend Suvi. He'd told her it was like walking the main royal yard without a tether while sculpting. During the storm, it was even more intense. His consciousness drifted up and up until the ship seemed like a lost toy. Clouds gathered around him. The wind swirled west to southwest. He created a hole in its current, like dropping a stone in a fast-running stream. He formed the space around the ship and extended it into the surrounding water. He flattened the area across the ocean and stretched it bigger and bigger until the violent waves near Coral Star began to dissipate. He steered a helpful wind into the reef sails to pilot the ship from danger. Coral Star seemed to jump at the chance. She moved with a nimble grace northward and away from the worst of the storm. To Dylan, this took no time at all, and he was ready to return to his body when an unexpected shape caught his attention. A Canaan shape. A Greer. The goddess threw her head back, laughing as she danced among the winds, whirling counterclockwise. Her black hair was cast all around her dark head. Her bare brown arms were likewise flung wide to the storm. She was one with the clouds, and yet not. Her gown matched the color of her surroundings and faded from dark to light and back again in patterns Dylan recognized from his mother's paintings. Flashes of lightning glittered all around her like white-hot silver. Majestic Agreer was all at once young and old. She portrayed a sensual beauty and power in her joyfulness that no mortal could have matched. Not even my Dar could dance like that, he thought. Dylan had sensed her presence before. As a waterborne and a practicing loud dancer, it couldn't be avoided. He lived on a Greer's waters, after all. She embodied crest and trough, expanding and contracting tides. She was both the world's blood and the world's heartbeat. However, he'd always visualized her as an abstract concept, the spirit of the ocean, not an actual entity. To see her was a shock. Transfixed, he couldn't bring himself to turn away. He drifted closer. Mid-whirl, she paused and turned her attention to him. All at once, he felt caught like an insect on a pin. Her black gaze was brimmed with a presence so vast that he fought and urged to flinch. Terror spurred his faraway heart to beat faster. "What do you want, little one?" Her voice was huge in his mind. Stunned, it took a moment to form a response. He knew he couldn't show her his terror. She would dismiss him, and he had need of her goodwill, more so now than ever before. "Great lady, I am here to protect my family and my home." The Greer cast her gaze down at the ocean surface. "Why would you venture into my storm? Surely my children would know better." He didn't wish to argue. He had a feeling it wouldn't go well. "We did so to avoid an enemy who wished to drown us. We had no wish to do the same." "Ah," she said, "the land walkers, they sensed their deaths. They should have had more care." Dylan didn't move. To agree would give the impression that he wished the Acrasians ill. To disagree might mean that he disapproved. He could afford neither. She floated closer. And as she did, he became acutely aware of his insignificance. Again, he controlled his fear. He didn't wish to risk Dar's safety. "I can't, I won't," he thought. "You're brave." Again, he stayed silent. "Your spirit name." "It's Lord of the Sea." "It is." She smiled. "That is brash." He swallowed and held her gaze. "I like you, little lordling. Perhaps you will stay with me for a time." I think I'll stop there, because I think that's...
So, this is the first book
Yes.
we've got?
Yeah.
Is Dylan in the first book as well?
Dylan does make an appearance in the first book. He shows up about partway through. Suvi actually wasn't ever intended to be queen. Her father had intended for Nels to succeed him, and Nels did something he shouldn't have and ended up being disowned. So Suvi ended up being queen. Originally, she wanted to be in the Navy. She was trained. She was a midshipman. She wanted to be a captain of a ship. That's what she wanted to do. And Dylan was her friend that she met when she was in the Navy. And so he makes appearance. He's in the book. He's in the first book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is he more of a main character in the second book, or is he just...
You know how, I don't know, when you're writing, you have certain plans, and then when those plans meet the characters,
Yes.
things happen.
Right.
He deserves a bigger part in the second book, and I really want to write a book that is just entirely about Dylan and Dar and all the things that they do, because I really love Dylan and Dar, and they're a lot of fun. But my publisher wanted book 2 to be involve Nels and Suvi and bring that in. So he has a very important role in book 2, just as he has a very important role in book 1. But there will be. My favorite writer, one of my favorite writers, is Terry Pratchett. But the way he writes a series is the way I want to write a series. So you just make this really fancy world with all these wonderful details, and then you write about these characters for a while, and then you write about these characters over here for a while, and then you write about those characters over there for a while. And that's my plan, is what I really want to do. But readers need something to latch on to that's similar in the first few books. So there will be more Dylan, I promise. Anyone have any other questions?
I will ask a question. So one thing I noticed through all your work is there's a lot of historical research. I get the impression you enjoy research.
Yeah.
And what fascinates me is that, like, it makes it the more to speak to the genre and fantastical fictions kind of thing is, you know, the historical aspect and the fantasy aspect becomes more than the sum of its parts. And I'm wondering, you know, as a writer, like, how does that, you know, how do you marry these? You do this research about the Troubles in the 70s, and then you bring in, and I mean, what is that like? Do you enjoy that process? Is it fertile for both? You know what I mean, for the fantasy side when
Yeah.
you're researching the reality side? And
Oh yeah.
vice versa?
Oh yeah. This is one of my favorite things about writing. When I was writing Blood and Honey, I was doing I can't even express to you how much research I did for that. And I talked to people who lived through the Troubles, and I didn't just read, because there's so much that is missed, that is not recorded when it comes to history. It's very, very true that the history is written by the victors, and so there's a certain tone that is I won't say both sides were bad. There's no good guy on that one. There really isn't. There just isn't. But it's really important to talk to people who've lived through that if they're available. So that's what I did. And one of the things that Brian recommended to me was a memoir of someone who had actually done time in Long Kesh prison. Because there's a section where Liam does time in Long Kesh prison. He's arrested. And it's called Cage 9. So Harvey is one of my favorite movies. I love Harvey. Jimmy Stewart is like one of my favorites. I really love him. And Harvey's just like the best. But in Irish folklore, pukas are very, very dark, very dark. They're not fluffy bunnies. They're shapeshifters, and they're very scary. So anyway, I'm reading along in Cage 9, right? And there's this chapter heading, and it says Harvey. And I'm like, that's not that Harvey. That is not that Harvey. There is no way that is that Harvey. Sure enough, that's that Harvey. Apparently, one of the cages and the cages, I should probably explain what those are. The cages were this chain link fenced areas where they would have like a couple of Nissan huts. Originally, Long Kesh prison was a World War II Air Force base. And so instead of building a whole prison, they just sectioned off these Nissan huts that used to house equipment. So there's no heating in them. And then threw in a shower or whatever in there. And then stuffed as many men as they could get into the things. And it's very cold in Ireland, we'll just say. So anyway, one of these huts ended up being haunted, and no one would sleep in there. Everyone, as crowded and awful and horrible as the conditions were in the hut, they crowded even more in the one that was not haunted. So they actually had a priest come in and exorcise the hut. And they called the ghost Harvey after the Harvey in the movie. So, yeah. So mine was not the first puka to do time in Long Kesh. So I love when weird little things happen. Because I didn't know that when I first started writing. I had no idea I couldn't believe it. So I love when things like that happen. Any other questions? Do you have another one?
Well, actually, I have one. So you've got the Irish Troubles, crime plus fantasy. You've got the Flintlock Fantasy coming, that you're working on now. That's any other worlds that you're dying to write? I mean, in the copious amount of time that you have.
Oh yeah, I have notes, all kinds of notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's more. There's more. And it's kind of silly, but as much detail and research that I like to do about a setting and like have in place there, I kind of I prefer to be able to work within those settings, but I have other settings that crop up.
Can you continue to go back in time?
I don't really want to do
70s,
that.
the Flintlock.
Yeah, I don't really want to do that, honestly. The whole George R. R. Martin Game of Thrones medieval fantasy has been it's been done a lot. And mind you, it's good, it's great, it's fun, but I want to study other things. That time period doesn't draw me, really, to be honest. So there are other things that I think are interesting, and so I like the idea of marrying what in my mind is urban fantasy with settings that people don't normally think about when they think urban fantasy. So Flintlock era. So
What drew you to that, other than that old guns are cool? To be my opinion.
the old guns are cool. I actually like swords myself. I love sabers, so that was part of it. I have to blame Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I really have to, and I really like that book, the setting and all the crazy that goes with that. So that's what brought me there to begin with. And I thought at the time I was toying around with the idea, I had read an essay that a couple of other writers had written about, and they were science fiction writers, had written about fantasy, and they were saying that fantasy makes medieval period and feudalism really attractive and shouldn't do this at all, and no American should ever read it. And I was just like, well, it's nice that you have that opinion. Everyone has them. But in all honesty, that Tolkien wasn't writing for Americans, he was writing for the British. And so feudalism and monarchy and all of that are heavy-duty themes in it. So that made sense. And so I thought to myself, what would fantasy have looked like if it were written originally by an American rather than someone who was British? So that's how I ended up there. It's not, my work is nothing like Tolkien, and I hope no one thinks that I think I am, because no. But that's where I started. Every author starts with a starter question, a seed question, as it were. So that was mine.
Cool. All right.
She rambled.
Thank you. That's
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
we have books back
We
here.
got books, we got food.